And now to the American midterm elections, which many predicted was going to result in a red wave victory for Republicans. Well, that wave turned out to be little more than a trickle. But before that was obvious, some journalists in Australia were losing their minds at the prospect of Conservatives doing well. Radical left-wing Saturday paper columnist Paul Bongiorno disgracefully invoked the Holocaust as a comparison and seemed to suggest a Republican victory meant democracy was being eroded. He wrote, "The USA is supposed to be a beacon of democracy. It's now sadly a sick joke. A Republican gubernatorial candidate," that's actually not the word, it's gubernatorial, but we'll let him off the hook for that, "in Arizona to great applause is promising to change voting laws so the Democrats can never win again." This is Germany in the 1930s. Well, this clown has 165,000 followers on Twitter and writes as a supposed journalist for the Saturday paper and the New Daily. And he is likening the situation in America to Nazi Germany. What a disgrace. He also makes clear election denial claims that a proposed change to voting laws would result in Democrats never winning ever again. I thought that was an irredeemable sin. I guess not. These radical commentators have no moral standards at all. Far left Sydney Morning Herald columnist Jane Caro tweeted in response, "I keep thinking that the election in 1933 that saw Hitler, leader of the biggest party in the Reichstag, made chancellor. What happened after that does not bear thinking about." Well, these people are absolutely nuts, and shame on the editors of all three of those publications for publishing their work. Now, I have to say it was good to see ABC journalists not lowering themselves to that standard. However, there were a few American panelists guilty of spruiking claims that Republican victories would result in the abuse of power.
You'll see the House Republicans take over many of those committees and just start investigation after investigation.
The number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 article of business in the Republican House will be to impeach Joe Biden, will be to shut down the government, will be to investigate Hunter Biden's laptop, will be to investigate Dr. Anthony Fauci, and will be to investigate any political opponents that Donald Trump picks and chooses for them.
They'll be trying to haul every Justice Department official, every U.S. attorney before Congress. I mean, the degree to which the once fairly protected legal and judicial system in the U.S. suddenly gets pulled into the turmoil of polarized partisan politics, that could be another casualty of the next 2 years.
It means that Republicans will control the committees in the House. We know that they want to look into the withdrawal from Afghanistan. We know they want to look into the federal government's COVID response. We know that they are thinking about putting together a select committee to pour over American policy towards China. We know they want to investigate the president's son, Hunter Biden, for alleged financial improprieties.
And if you listened to the ABC coverage, you would have thought a certain term was mandatory for presenters on the day.
Why do you think some voters have chosen to elect candidates who've been dubbed election deniers?
There's pushback here against the Trump-inspired election deniers. Election deniers seem, while it looks like a couple hundred Republican election deniers or election questioners have been elected to office.
The majority of GOP candidates were election deniers.
But as the results became clear and the rhetoric for the most part stayed calm, the ABC was backtracking with a caveat, of course.
But by and large, this national election was spared spurious claims of fraud, so far at least.
And credit to this US commentator for reminding the ABC presenters to remember 2016.
What has also been a test has been for the Donald Trump candidates, many of them election deniers. How did they go broadly?
But I think it's important to note on something like this that this is not just one party, right? Like we should remember the percentage of Democrats that questioned the 2016 presidential election result, as well as Stacey Abrams in Georgia.
But of course, the usual offenders on the ABC could not stop themselves from campaigning for one side.
But, far from the expectations of a sweeping red wave, I've heard the phrase red trickle this morning.
That's pretty stock standard response, I think, from Donald Trump.
It was a significant loss for MAGA, his brand of MAGA Republican politics. And, it could not have come a moment too late, speaking as an American.
Today, it was back to business for Governor DeSantis as another tropical storm heads towards the state. The storm is on track to become a hurricane before it hits the East Coast. Not too far from where Donald Trump is holed up at his Mar-a-Lago estate, mulling his next move.
Well, Tim, very keen to hear your thoughts about this. What did you make of the coverage, particularly from the Australian journalists?
Well, for a start, let me just say, hands up everyone who predicted a red wave and got it totally wrong. Okay, that dealt with. Maybe people should begin moving away from viewing everything in American politics through a Trump prism. That might be a helpful way to understand phenomena such as Ron DeSantis in Florida. Speaking of whom, there's been a long-held belief among the left in the US and I guess the left sort of in the Western world that with a growing Hispanic population in the United States that would turn states like Texas, Florida, Arizona towards Democrats because Hispanic people were just assumed to be left-leaning. Well, there was a great moment during the early coverage of the election when an astonished network presenter said, he's looking at stats coming out of Miami and various other areas in Florida, and said, "Oh my God, these Hispanics are voting like white working class people." So it was like, oh my, he was really appalled. He was startled. Now, I don't know why it's a shock to people that a group of people who tend to be Christian, who tend to have working class jobs, might behave in the same way as other people who have working class jobs and are Christian, but we've seen a huge shift there. I'd encourage people to look at the Hispanic influence in US politics towards 2024. It might be far more significant, especially if Ron DeSantis is running as president, which he may well do.
Yeah, Caroline, Tim makes such a good point about the demographics and how they've shifted. I kind of got the impression that some in the media were a bit disappointed that they didn't have this narrative about Nazi Germany re-emerging, that we had a non-Trump candidate perform so well, who's going to be going to heads with him to be running for the president eventually. And it seemed like there was a little bit of disappointment that they're losing this narrative of this radical right-wing MAGA agenda.
Yeah, and that's why, for example, they're trying to shoehorn Donald Trump into the weather report, which I just found extraordinary. Like, why would you bother? Why would you bother? Ron DeSantis did do very well. He doesn't have the baggage. He comes across a lot more sincere than, say, someone like Donald Trump. And the other thing that's really important to understand about the demographics in Florida is a lot of those Hispanics are Cubans who have escaped communism. So, of course, they're not left-leaning because most of them swam to the USA to get rid of what the Democrats are, their brand of politics. So the Florida example is slightly different to other parts of the US because, yes, they're Hispanics, but they're not a homogenous group. They're quite different in that sense. Ron DeSantis did really well, and it's a lot more difficult for the media and even the media here to have the same crack at him, although they have tried, about how he bullies business. All he did was take Disney's special tax status away from them, so I probably wouldn't quite call that bullying. But he's a lot more, like I said, authentic about his politics, I think, and I think he's probably more consistent. And I think that's why a lot of people like him. Our media here are devastated. Our media are devastated that they don't have the grist for the mill that they were hoping for, and so now they're going to go off and they'll find some other innocuous BS point to latch onto to try and suggest that the world's ending in the US.
Well, we're going to go to a quick